Gentleman just back. Thank you. Mr. Comer, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is going to revolve around digital currency jurisdiction.
Yep.
Bitcoin and distributed ledger technology are the subject of many interesting regulatory questions today. For example, the CFTC asserted jurisdiction over digital currencies such as Bitcoin, calling them commodities, while the SEC asserted jurisdiction over DAO tokens, calling them securities. Similar questions arise in connection with the treatment of distributed ledger technology by other regulators. What can you do to help clarify the regulatory treatment of these new technologies?
Yeah. So here's a perfect example of how our rules and SEC rules were written for a time before there were digital currencies. And what we now need to do is reinterpret these rules in light of this very fast-paced technological innovation, which are these cryptocurrencies. And it's a volatile environment. It's one that's evolving very, very quickly. And so what we're doing at the Commission is just calling it straight down the line. We're approaching this like a good umpire. We're calling balls and strikes. We read our statute and the definition of commodities to involve these new instruments. And you mentioned that we registered a cryptocurrency exchange. We did it because they met our requirements. And I had our lawyers go through it carefully and say, yep, they meet the requirements, so we registered. We also, however, have just taken on a Bitcoin Ponzi scheme because we also believe they're meeting our requirements, but in the wrong way, and are violating those. So we're playing this straight down the line. We're interpreting our rules in light of this new technological innovation, and we're looking at this very carefully and very thoughtfully, but we have to reinterpret a rule book that was written before those came into existence for the world that we have today.
Okay. Switching gears, the Volcker rule is currently administered by 5 agencies jointly, including the CFTC. The Treasury Department recently criticized the rule for its extraordinarily complex and burdensome compliance regime, which hinders both market-making functions necessary to ensure a healthy level of market liquidity and hedging necessary to mitigate risk. What role do you think the CFTC should take in the future implementation of the Volcker rule, and how do you scale that to your available resources?
Yeah. So I think the Treasury Secretary has taken the lead on this, and it's in the Treasury report, and the administration view is not to call for the repeal of the Volcker rule, but to make it suitable for our markets and ultimately suitable for broader economic growth and market health. And I believe that is the right course. We'll be in the boat rowing on fixing the Volcker rule, but we won't be the lead oar that will come out of Treasury. And we look forward to what recommendations made. As far as from a market's point of view, my concern with Volcker is that it be conducive to healthy market activity. There is some presumptions built into the current definition of the Volcker rule that presumes that activity is impermissible proprietary trading as opposed to permissible market making. And I have some questions with some of those presumptions. They don't seem to be based upon market reality. They seem to be based upon maybe a bias against markets. And as a market regulator, we're very concerned where we believe there's bias against healthy market activity.
Mm-hmm. With respect to position limits, the SEFs are required to set position limits, but have no view into the overall positions held by people who transact on their platform. Does it make sense to eliminate this requirement?
It's a very complicated area. The nature of the swaps market is to have multiple execution points, unlike our futures market that has one execution point for most of the listed products. So it is complicated. How do you have a uniform position limits when it's actually implemented at multiple points who don't necessarily have a means of communication? Which is why before I went into government, I actually proposed to the CFTC a public-private partnership to form a council that would agree on position limits and apply it across. And that's something we're still looking at the Commission, and we'll continue to look at as to whether that might be a solution to this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Jimmy,